So hello and welcome to a special live edition of Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that gives you a peek inside the minds of some truly inspirational teachers. The pace might be a bit different because it's live, and that means we can sort of embrace the interactive element of it and, use the chat, share your opinions, support each other, ask questions. Tonight, we're joined by Amy Bills. Hi, Amy.
Hello. Hi, Karen.
She's Deputy CEO of a multi-academy trust of 19 schools and the mastermind behind the Thinking Deeply About Primary Mathematics CPD sequence, as well as a much anticipated education book club. And we're going to follow her teachers on their journey as they explore the different books that Amy has selected, as well as the Thinking Deeply About Primary Mathematics CPD for subject leads. And tonight our focus is going to be Thinking Deeply About Primary Mathematics. And so, Amy, what have you put in place for your subject leaders and why?
So I'm really, really lucky in that I inherited a structure and a framework that meant there was already established groups for our subject leaders, so our maths leaders, but also across all of the subjects, our DSLs, SENCOs, all those kind of key leaders across our settings. So that's brilliant, and what a privilege to have that opportunity to be able to work with those colleagues with those groups already defined. So for us this year, it's been really, really intentional about the CPD opportunities that we provide. So for our maths leaders, tipping my hat to the NSAS and CPD curriculum, and having had the privilege of working alongside Abby Bayford in my previous role, looking at mapping out a curriculum that would enable us to come together to prioritise those curriculum conversations around what we know are going to be the biggest needs for everybody, the big hitters, best bets, to really establish that shared model of excellence. So things will look different in our different academies because, of course, they will. Context different, children are different, but that we've got that equity of real high quality CPD that means our maths leaders can support teachers in their schools, which in turn means all of our children get that access to the best possible maths education.
That sounds like quite a logistical feat, to say the least. How much of your time are you dedicating to the organisation of the CPD? Is it 100% of what you do? No,
it isn't. So, like I say, the structure of the groups and the personnel, I was lucky enough to inherit, and I've only joined the trust in September. But a lot of my thinking time around this is really that curriculum mindset. So what was it that we could sequence and map out across the year and why? So looking at that, almost mirroring the EEF's approach to that tiered planning. What are the high quality teaching and wider strategies that we can unpick and apply to everybody? And the planning, it'll be iterative like any curriculum is we'll see how we go, we'll see what our assessment information tells us through the year. So I haven't got a certain allocation of time within my working day, week, half a term that would be for this specifically. But in my role as the senior most education leader within our organisation, I think it's absolutely one of my biggest responsibilities and biggest opportunities to have a massive impact by really thinking deeply, carefully about that CPD for colleagues.
Nice, yeah, because obviously the higher quality the teachers feel and the more competent they feel, the sort of the higher quality education you can provide for your pupils. So I think you're absolutely spot on.
Absolutely, and it comes back to it's putting staff first, right? But actually, it's investing that time. Because we've all, me included, everybody have a professional obligation to keep getting better, to continuously improve. Not because we need to improve, but because we can. But I think one of my, a key aspect of my role is to facilitate that and to provide that network.
Yeah, I think I was having a conversation with someone earlier about empowering teachers. And so my intention with Thinking Deeply About Primary Mathematics was to give people the principles which would allow them to then make decisions and to justify those decisions, as the most expert person in a given room. So yeah, I totally see where you're coming from there. How did you decide on the chapters to use?
So this took an awful lot of time, because there are some chapters that we won't use this year, but hopefully building on them. This book is, all of our CPD groups are linked to several core texts. This is the core text for our maths CPD group. And it was really looking and thinking carefully about what we know about diagnostic assessment information broadly across the curriculum, and then obviously specifically in maths. So when it came to sequencing the chapters, I think we tried to look at the rhythm of the academic year, some of the things that we thought might make the biggest impact as early as possible, and some of those things that might take a little bit of more unpicking later in the year, when colleagues have got to know their new classes, new colleagues. Some of our maths leaders are new to that leadership role, so it's a lot around trying to do it in a really sensible, timely and coherent way, like you would a curriculum. And so the reason for putting the language chapter front and centre is, I think it's Mark Rowland that calls it the closest thing we've got to a golden ticket. Now, we know that if we can empower our teachers to empower our children with language, that's a big key into the door to the rest of their mathematical development. So that was certainly the rationale for putting that first. And there's some chapters that we've dedicated 2 sessions to, but we'll talk about that as we progress through the year, I know.
Nice. So it's like Lloyd talking about those highest leverage ideas, and I think language,
Sure.
What is it? Just talking about how, it's not that kids don't understand sometimes, it's just that they can't articulate what they understand. So I'm totally with you.
And I think one of the key messages, Kieran, that we took from that chapter is that it's not just about the children having that breadth of vocabulary, it's about the real conceptual understanding behind it, and how it allows them to articulate their understanding really succinctly and clearly. So we talked a lot about not just the choice of vocabulary, the importance of it as a lever in itself, but actually, in order to articulate a really clear understanding, in turn supports their conceptual understanding. And that's, something that we really took some time to talk about.
Nice. Yeah. I'm thinking about threshold concepts. I seem to be thinking about them a lot recently. And, the fact that they're discursive, they help you explain other things that you didn't realize you understood, or that you now understand. Yeah. So tell me about the session. How did it go?
Yeah, it was really, really good. On a kind of a personal level, it was great for me because I'm new to the organisation. This is a new role and a new trust. It was brilliant just to be able to bring people together, just to meet. We've got some new maths leaders, so that was fantastic because they've immediately got a support network around them. And colleagues are already working together through the Origin Maths Hub as well. So it's good to be able to make those links within and across the group. The session was great. So we unpicked, the way we structured it was chunks of time to look at the chapter, chunks of time to go and chat. It was virtual, which I think, given the current climate, is sensible. But actually, I think it will alleviate some barriers to engagement as well, because whilst we serve 2 local authorities, actually our academies are quite geographically dispersed. So I think if we can remove some of those barriers to getting people together, we'll continue to do it in that way. But we looked at the key principles throughout the chapter. So making time to talk about language, quality over quantity, modelling those expected behaviours, and then building that deliberately into the questions that we ask over time. We took those one at a time, really broke them down, talked about the key messages in the book, but then also what we felt might be strengths in our current role, school, classrooms, where there might be some risks, and what opportunities we could bring together as a group to really harness our collective capacity, which for me, I know I'm biased, but I think is a particular beauty of being part of a trust, is the ability to do that.
So will you build in time then for teachers to get together and talk about it, or will it be the subject leaders who go back and say, okay, this is how we spend our PPS sessions, for instance?
Yeah, so our maths leaders will now lead those conversations in their schools. And it's interesting. So every CPD and discussion that we do, we evaluate and we ask for feedback every single time, and that's vitally important. The big difference is that I then safeguard time for me to go and read those and to follow up and to do something about that. And when we were talking in the session about risks, that was one of the biggest risks that colleagues felt, was actually finding and safeguarding the time for those conversations, which is really common for all of us. And I think particularly common where we've got leaders who are also teaching full time, doing netball club after school, doing breakfast club and you know, whatever else. So we really talked about that. So our leaders will use their leadership time, use their weekly briefing sessions or whatever the mechanisms are within their schools to raise the profile of language and the explicit teaching at their own pace. And I think it comes back to empowering. The point of this group is to establish those models of excellence, to support colleagues with signposting and resources and the guidance if they need it, and to empower them to go and lead and really, you know, champion their subject and support colleagues. I think another layer of that, though, is the communication. I know we were talking earlier on between myself, maths leaders, and our head teachers. Our head teachers supporting our leaders to lead really, really well and to have those conversations. But also my responsibility of keeping our head teachers in the loop about the content of these sessions, to empower them to go and talk to their maths leaders in the hope of bringing all that seamlessly together and having those conversations. And that'll be one of the first things that we'll pick up on next time is what, you know, we have established some things that we wanted to achieve, each of them following the session. Have we been able to do that? And is that realistic? And how then do we refine that throughout the year to try and, you know, make that a bit more doable if necessary?
Excellent. So you're almost upskilling the head teachers at the same time. You know, not that their skills are sort of low or anything, but more the fact that you know, the way we think about mathematics teaching and pedagogy and things is different. You know, certainly after 2012, when we had the first draft of the 2014 national curriculum. You know, if you have been in school leadership solely for that amount of time, you know, I think it's well worth dipping back in and seeing how things are going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in my role, I have the privilege of a little more time than they do. And so, you know, one of the ways I think I can have the biggest impact in supporting them is to distill some of that, signpost to the key, you know, key aspects that I think are a focus. And by starting with language, like we discussed a few minutes ago, we know that for all of our academies, that will feature very heavily in their improvement priorities. So it's always, it's also supporting head teachers with the real big drivers in their improvement plans by ensuring that what we do in CPD sessions outside of them, you know, are, as Lloyd would say, levers are really helping to leverage that.
And will you be taking your key vocabulary and your inspiration for that from the NCTM because you work for the hub?
Yeah, we do. So we linked up with the Origin Hub. So we used the vocabulary glossary document that is from them, but we did a lot of signposting, and I'll try and do that quite a lot because different colleagues will feel more comfortable sometimes with different sets of resources. People have got, you know, some people are using White Rose, for example, as a spine for their curriculum, and so there's a particular vocabulary that would map with the objectives there. Some colleagues don't, and so things like NCTM is particularly useful. But we link an awful lot with the. I mean, they're brilliant. Why wouldn't you? With their resources as well, and you know, across the curriculum. Yeah.
And were there any unexpected reactions or responses during the session?
Not unexpected necessarily. As I say, we've all got language development in some way, shape or form as a priority across our improvement plans. And I think there's a real agreement that it can be a huge limiting factor in pupils' progress. But also, I think sometimes there's that realization when you really unpick the language and the explicit teaching of language that we are actively developing children's vocabulary in terms of breadth and applying it in our teaching. But I think there was, let's say, a renewed focus on its purpose for an accurate, precise, clear explanation, as well as the actual understanding of the language itself. And I think, just that conversation around time, which wasn't unexpected. We know no one's ever got enough of it. But I think that's going to prove a challenge that we'll wrestle with together. But again, by having everybody together, there'll be times where we can halve workload, hopefully, or cut it by 19 with some things, who knows. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. I enjoyed writing that bit where I gave examples of, long sort of flowing descriptions of mathematical ideas, and then here's how you can do it in 4 or 5 words, and it isn't always the case. Sometimes you do need more words, but I think when I fell in love with maths education, it was when I realized what the words could do and how they basically spelled out the concepts for you as well. So this is brilliant. I need to know as much as possible about this.
Yeah, and I think by deliberately going back in and unpicking that and reading through that chapter, it was a subject knowledge refresher for all of us. Just using those examples. And I think one of the ones you use, I think, is approximation, isn't it, in the book? And we could all recall examples of a child who understands, it because you've seen it in their work. They've shown you on their whiteboard. They've shown you with the manipulatives on the table. But if you'd have just gone on the answer they gave you, when you called on them, you perhaps wouldn't have been so sure. So a big leverage point for the children, actually, in that sense. But it was definitely a good subject knowledge refresher for all of us. Yeah.
It's great when you see the pupils using that terminology. Like, I was in a lesson where they were about negative numbers, and they were talking about negative 61.85 and this kind of thing, and using accurate language, and without me prompting. And I thought, it's great to see. You just like sort of big smile as I go through those kind of lessons.
I was going to say, they love it. They love nothing more than not only having learn new vocabulary, but then being able to use it consistently unprompted. It's great for confidence, isn't it, and self-esteem, and we know that being successful, knowing more, learning more, being able to draw upon that is brilliant in itself for self-esteem. So it's that cycle then, isn't it, of improvement. So yeah,
definitely. So going back to, do I see myself as someone who can do maths, or am I someone who cannot? And being able to explain things, I think, is a big part of that. So what did you want your subject leaders to take away from the session? I think you may have answered quite a lot of that.
Yeah, we've talked before, haven't we, about something immediately tangible, and something that's a bit of a slow burner. And I think with sessions like that, I'm always very, very conscious that people's time is precious, and so it needs to be worth people putting that time aside and coming to, first and foremost. But second of all, that I would never be able to hope for everybody to take the same thing away, because we're 19 different schools, 19 different communities, colleagues. So it's about that context. So for me, that immediate takeaway were the conversations and the resource that they will then reflect on when they're back in school with their, in a staff room, in a CPD session, in their own classrooms. And then beyond that, some things to consider over time. So we talked about the strategic mapping of that vocabulary. We talked about the incidental opportunities to pre-teach some of that vocabulary very, very deliberately, targeting those children that we know are going to need it most as early as possible, and how far ahead we can think about that. So lots of slow burners to think over time. But one of the other things that I look to do every time is some really helpful signposting. So your YouTube channel, for example, where colleagues can go and look at some of those videos for their own practice, but also share with colleagues. We looked specifically at some Freya model templates. So there were some colleagues in the evaluation that said, right, it's already up on classroom walls, that key piece of vocab for that lesson or that week. And so having that common way of approaching it in that sense. And then we looked at, I've got it here actually, shamelessly going to plug it. So I have got Thinking Deeply here. but we use Shannon's etymology examples, because that was another one, you know, in terms not only the definition and the use in the explanation for the children, but fascinating to actually teach the children. And I think it's essential, the actual root of the word. So we were looking at, I think it's isosceles or the different triangle vocabulary that Shannon uses. And it was a bit of, again, just a refresher for people thinking, do you know what? That in itself is just worth a 2-minute conversation in the staff room that might immediately help and support. So some immediate takeaways, I hope. And then, like I say, some slightly more strategic slow burners.
Yeah, those slow burners you describe, I think, will have capacity to you know, support pupils across the curriculum. Because I remember, I think the first time I read about Tier 2 vocabulary was Daisy Christodoulou. I can't remember if it was Making Good Progress or a blog post, but I remember thinking about the word minuend, and it means that which is to be diminished. And it just seemed like diminish is, in my opinion, the perfect Tier 2 language, or perfect Tier 2 word, because you're not going to use it every day, but when you do use it, you're going to get a lot from it. And then it almost becomes part of Tier 3 when you put it in this mathematical context, you know. I think
yeah. And I think by looking at etymology in that way, you going back to levers, the children's understanding of those roots and then encountering them in different subjects across the curriculum is absolutely helpful. But isn't it? It always strikes me where a lot of misconceptions, and we're going to use that chapter later on in the year, but a lot of the misconceptions often come from where children are familiar with the root or the vocabulary, but actually in maths, it can have a whole different meaning. And that's where we came back to being really strategic about looking ahead as far as possible. Where do we need to guard against that and be very deliberate in the way we teach or when we teach?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, you know, because they're overgeneralizing because they've got this general sensation, you know, built up already, and then they're bringing it up to the table. And then, like you say, it doesn't make quite as much sense mathematically as they'd hope, you know. Yeah. So I think the only question then is, do you learn Greek or Latin as your language?
Let's not get into the whole Latin debate, shall we? It's a whole of it. I'm all for it, by the way. I'm all for it.
And so what systems do you have in place to try and ensure that the session is as impactful as possible across the 19 schools?
So as I've said, everything we do, we evaluate. Nothing fancy, just literally fill in Microsoft Forms very quickly, and always keep a few minutes at the end for colleagues to do that. But then it's really important for me to then have that time to go back and to look at that and to read. So accessible to everybody. So the session is attended by our maths leaders, but everything that's shared is accessible to everybody. And that's really, really important. So, you know, colleagues can signpost, but also people might not have attended the session. People might take different things from it. So all those resources, the conversations around the chapter, that's accessible to everyone. But then for me, the impact will be, there'll be several ways to gauge that. Myself, conversations with head teachers, colleagues in school improvement roles should now be able to, over time, be able to see the impact of those conversations in classrooms. You know, not necessarily immediately children being more articulate and having a better command of that mathematical vocabulary, but certainly, for example, one of the colleagues had put in their evaluation, we've got FRAME model, you know, on the wall now in every classroom looking at this particular word or whatever it might be. So there'll be those short-term impacts that we'll be able to see. The richness and the subject specificity of the conversations, the deliberate planning, which hopefully then in turn is going to mean that our children are more confident and able mathematicians. But also having that common language, having these aspects, and as we progress through the year, chapters that have been a focus in all of our schools, and having the book in all of our schools, which we've ensured is the case, means that actually there'll be a buzz, there'll be a momentum as that grows throughout the year. And I think that's equally as powerful as all the strategic planning and mapping of the curriculum. And then it's just important, you know, that I put my money where my mouth is and continue to support, continue to signpost to resources, and continue to use that feedback to refine the sessions throughout the year.
Nice. I think a very sensible idea. I recommend that every school buy 19 copies of Thinking Deeply About Primary Mathematics.
I'm sure you do.
Guaranteed success.
Yeah.
No, it sounds really exciting. And you know, for me personally, it's awesome to see things that I've thought and then committed to the written word and sort of utilized. You know, and to be honest, in a year's time, I might try and visit Coventry and the surrounding area to see how it's going.
Anytime. Yeah. We would love that. You're more than welcome. And I think that's great, because they will all have done, obviously the curriculum is as it is, and particularly with maths, but what they will have done with it will look different in all of them because of the context of the communities and the children. You know, we've got some academies who children speak, you know, across the cohort up to 30, 40 different languages. We've got some academies that have less than 50 children on roll. You know, some with getting on for 400. So that in itself it's one of the things I love most about my job, because I just have a whale of a time. It's brilliant. It's honestly brilliant. It's such a privilege. Yeah, you can come and do a little guided tour and see how we're getting on.
Excellent. No, you're absolutely right. I've been in lots of classes this term, and no teacher, you know, despite having had the same advice in some instances over the last 5 years or whatever, you know, how they own it and how they take my advice looks totally different depending on the teacher. But like you said, that's the beauty of teaching. That's the beauty of our jobs, is that we get to experience and then take ideas from them. Oh, they've used it in that way. So
yeah.
I reckon, yeah, maybe ideas for the sequel. If I ever, although I promised my wife I wouldn't write another book until the boys are grown up. So, so it could be a while. So I think if we give people a second to write in the chat, I'll just sort of talk about where we're going to next, and we'll test out these captions. So next week, because yesterday you had a book club session about Connect the Dots.
We did, yeah. So we part of another kind of layer, I guess, of our CPD across the year, although this is much less tailored to particular objectives, but actually is tailored to those common improvement priorities and different areas of school improvement. So we welcome Tricia Taylor to join us yesterday for our first of, I think we've got 12 book club sessions across the year. So again, Thinking Deeply About Primary Maths isn't the only book we've put in every staff room, but obviously it's, you know, the one at the front of the shelf. So Connect the Dots was our first book club, and Tricia joined us from Spain, which was, you know, I mean, bless her, you know, really appreciated. And it was great because it just gave colleagues a chance to listen to her perspective, you know, listen to those key fundamental principles in the book, and then have a good chat about how we might apply that in our practice. Excellent.
And so we're going to get together next week, 8 p.m. again. Hopefully some of your teachers will join us, you know, and hopefully they're watching and think, look, it's not that bad.
Yeah, to be brave.
And, you know, so I suppose shout out to Amy's Twitter, hopefully on the screen. And there is a link to the TDaPE Discord in the description. Well, who knows? You know, I have no idea what it actually looks like on the other end. I've got to watch it back later on. But I suppose all that's left to say, Amy, is thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Thank you for the invite.
And everyone who's watching or listening, thank you very much. And until next time, see you later.
See you later. Thanks, Kieran.
Thanks, Shannon. Oh, there will be uproar if I don't play the theme tune. So let's try and get this.
Play it.